Hey, my name is Bryson, and I'm a second year resident in psychiatry. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about med school, and specifically what I regretted about my time in med school, and maybe what I would have done differently if I were to start med school right now. I think the first thing would be that I wish I had taken the first 2 years a bit more seriously. Really, the first 2 years is where you're learning all the material that you're going to use for the rest of your career. I mean, that you forget it and you relearn it, and you forget it and you relearn it. But a lot of what you learn and what you prune away from is this core of material that you learn during that time. And it's not like it's easy. You can't really relearn all the material that you learn in the first 2 years. This is really your only one shot to learn basically the core of all of medicine and of all the organ systems. And you might think that later on you can kind of cram for it when you're learning step one, or when you're studying for step one, but you really can't. It's much better to just learn it during those first 2 years rather than try and cram for it later when you have to take your exams. It's true that if you're taking a pass-fail class, all you have to do is pass the class, but really what you're trying to do is you know, you're kind of cheating yourself if you go through med school that way. You should really be using that time to put the information into your head as best as possible and organize it in a way that is going to work for your brain. My mentality was, you know, review the slides, try and learn all the materials, cram for the tests, and then use the extra time. And I would try and do like research or some extracurricular stuff. And that worked okay, but it came back when I had to study for step one, and I realized that I didn't remember a lot of the material as well as some of my classmates that had studied really hard during the first 2 years. So yeah, that's the first thing, and the second thing kind of goes along with that, and that's going to actual lectures. You know, if the lectures are recorded, a lot of times you can think that you're going to watch them later and you can times 2 the speed, and it'll be more efficient to study that way or get through the lectures that way. And that's, you know, that seems like it would work, but really when you are going through the lectures, that's a good time to actually be learning. That's when your brain is absorbing a good amount of the material. And if you're times twoing it, your brain is absorbing half as much, if not less. And if you're watching them at home rather than in a classroom, or like when they're live, when the lecture is live, there's a lot more things going on in your brain that's making the process interesting. It's like watching a movie in a theater versus, watching it on your phone when you're trying to do something else. You just don't get as much out of it. You consciously might think that you've gotten the whole lecture, but really the deeper parts of your brain that are actually learning and retaining the information, they're not processing it in the same way. And I came to this, I didn't think that was true until I realized that the 5 smartest kids in our class, the ones that did best on all the tests, were the same 5 that were always going to every single class and were usually like sitting up front or asking questions or very engaged in all the classes too. So it's not just even showing up to classes, it's also you have to be really actively learning when you're in class. And I didn't realize this until like maybe the second half of second year, that going to class and trying to take notes and trying to take a lot of notes and trying to organize the notes while I take the notes made the class a lot more fun and a lot more engaging, and I learned more from it. I think that trying to drag yourself into class for me, when I dragged myself into class the first year and just sort of sat there staring blankly at the lecturer, I didn't really get that much out of it, so it seemed natural for me to just like, oh, well, if I can speed up this process, why don't I do that? But that's not the right way to look at it. Try and go to class and try and learn actively when you're in the class. It's a huge time saver. It's hugely important for doing well. So that's the second thing that I would have recommended. I think the third thing is to keep in mind just the basics of what makes you happy and what makes your body feel like it's okay. Because a big part of med school is that a lot of people get really depressed in med school in a way that they hadn't in college or in high school. And it's kind of natural. It's not, I would almost say that it's not even depression, because you're put in an environment that it naturally causes depression for pretty much anybody. You're just studying all day. A lot of times you're not sleeping very well, and not eating well. You're kind of living like a monk, and it can be kind of depressing. You're seeing, especially in like third year, you're pulling crazy hours. You're kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. A lot of these things are what naturally make people depressed, or naturally make people less happy about life. And the three things that you have to always keep in mind, especially if you're feeling terrible, is, are you sleeping enough? Are you eating well? And are you getting a little bit of exercise? If those three things are intact, then you can think a little bit more about, like, oh, do I, maybe I have something more serious going on, or, I should get help. But always remember, if you're not feeling well, just think back to the basics, those three things: sleeping, eating, and exercising. And generally, more times than not, you'll realize that one of them is thrown off, or all of them are thrown off. And then you can remember, like, oh, okay, well, maybe that's partly what, why I feel the way that I do. So make sure to have that balance. The final thing is just to remember what you're there for. You're kind of taking an agreement to make studying and work and living like a monk sort of a priority for 3 or 4 years when you go to med school. And sometimes you can get distracted from this. It's like when you have an essay due and you try and clean up your room. Sometimes people get really into other hobbies like surfing, or I had a friend that was really into powerlifting, and he started competing in competitions during med school, and he was training in the morning and in the evening and really focusing on his diet and all this sort of stuff, but he was ignoring the school. He wasn't studying as much as he should have, and he ended up having to repeat a year and ended up not doing very well during some of his clinical years. And I think that's kind of a mistake to make. You have to remember what's important. It can feel good to be in med school and then start doing well on something else, or pick up a new hobby and get really good at it, but it can also be very easy to sort of make that your main focus, this other thing. And you have to remember that's not your thing. Your priority is always med school. When you're in med school, you have to make that a priority. I wouldn't try and do some other job or something else that's really gonna impact your med school. It's enough just to do that. So just try and cut out the other things. It's not necessary. You're trying to do well in med school it should be your priority. Once you can get that down, and once you learn how to do well in med school, it's kind of like a skill for life. You can apply it to other things. It's an amazing tool that it's a diploma that you get at the end of it, but really you've learned a process for learning and a process for applying yourself incredibly hard to whatever you want to do. That's really the main thing that you get out of med school. Most of the facts, most of the materials, especially if you specialize in something, all the other organ systems that you learn about, you barely ever have to use after that. But what you've learned and what you've taken away is how to learn and how to think and process a great deal of information very quickly, and apply yourself in a way that's much more intense than what other people are maybe even capable of doing. But that's only if you do it. You have to do it. And trying to split your efforts into something else, that's, you're kind of working against yourself. So what is that? I think that's 4. And then I think the 5th one is to not beat yourself up too much when you're in med school. It's kind of tough because everybody in med school is very competitive, and they come from a competitive background, and they come from probably a very growth-focused mindset where if you work hard, then you can achieve anything. But at a certain point, you've been probably the cream of the crop in high school and in college, and finally you're at this point where you're with all these other people that are very, very smart. You're in a pool, and in certain time, for most people, you kind of just hit certain limits. some people just have different kind of hardware in their brains, different capacities to learn different material, and you're put in, everybody's forced to take these tests, and sometimes you're not going to do as well as you wanted to do on the tests. And I think you should study as hard as you can, and like that's what my first 4 rules are all about, is how to apply yourself super well. But at a certain point, there's certain things that you just can't do. Like, you might not, the tests, they're only focusing on certain areas of intelligence. It's not all areas of intelligence, and really you shouldn't be tying your self-esteem to how well you're doing on these tests. Part of it is just learning to accept what things are. And, these tests are testing your short-term memory and language ability, recall of information, but there's a lot of other elements of intelligence that aren't really being tested. And intelligence isn't necessarily really correlated with being a great doctor either. Being a great doctor incorporates so many other different elements of being a person that are not really showing up on, in med school or in any of these objective measures. So I would just always keep that in mind, that it's not necessarily a good thing to tie your whole self-esteem and self-worth to a sense of accomplishment in med school. All that you should be doing is knowing that you're applying yourself as well as you can and focusing really hard and doing a great job. And you should always take pride in however far you are in med school and whatever you've achieved to get to that point. But trying to tie it to certain measures or compare yourself to your classmates, that's just going to make you miserable. And it's so easy to do, because pretty much everybody in medicine has that kind of mindset, is that they're always comparing themselves to other people and trying to succeed and do better. But you kind of have to let that go. It hurts. It works against you. It makes you so anxious. It can mess with your emotions, and it's not an easy thing to get rid of. But whenever you notice yourself doing that, then just remind yourself that it's not really a healthy way of approaching things. You just got to meet yourself where you're at. Yeah, it'll make your life a lot less miserable when you can realize that you just are what you are, and all you can do is your best. You can't beat yourself up for being something that you're not. So those are my 5 rules. Hopefully that's helpful to some people. Let me know what you think in the comments. All right, take care.